even, like you said, even with the people in the crowd singing along with him. And then sticking a medley right in the middle of It's All Right and For Sentimental Reasons, which we really haven't talked about either. It's like the perfect placement for that medley as well.
Yes.
It almost makes it side one and side two, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Do you disagree? Did you like this more than the James Brown? Like, how would you compare the two?
I would say that I liked it better than the James Brown album, but that's personal taste. And I think I like the James Brown album more than you guys did because it gave me live albums to me are a slice of life, right? And so a Sam Cooke concert and a James Brown concert are going to be two very different things. A James Brown concert is going to be dancing, large orchestration, like a whole show, right? Whereas the Sam Cooke thing, you're going there to hear Sam Cooke sing. And that's what this was. You heard Sam Cooke sing with, I wouldn't say light instrumentation, but instrumentation that's designed to buffer his voice, not be right there with it, like in the James Brown.
Right.
Version.
No, his voice definitely stood out more. He's probably not going as nuts as James Brown is, but it still sounds like he's getting into it and putting on a good performance, though, I think. So you can't, ignore that. I will say, though, I do have that Rolling Stone issue in front of me, and it says, the little blurb it says about this album was, Sam Cooke was elegance and soul personified, but he works this Florida club until it's hotter than hell, all the while sounding like he never breaks a sweat. And when the crowd
is true.
And when the crowd joins in with him on For Sentimental Reasons, it's magic. And I thought that was a good description.
I agree, and that's what I was just talking about before. The placement of that medley really it hammers home that you are in the middle of a show and that the show is still building, and that For Sentimental Reasons is about the halfway mark of the album, and it almost serves as an appetite whetter for the rest of the album. So we've got about 30 seconds here, Matt. It sounds like strong recommendation, huh?
Strong recommendation, and real quick, this album is in Best Ever Albums, but it's released in 1985.
Okay.
And so it's number 259 in the 80s, so it's a little different, even though it was recorded in the 60s. But this is an absolute recommend. This is one of my favorite albums that we've covered, period. So
great.
I'm glad we got to listen to it.
Perfect. And look at that. We hit the 15-minute mark on Matt's last word. And so that ends segment number 1 of our bonus episodes. We look forward to doing a lot more of these. How do you think it went, Matt?
It was good. I liked it. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Sounds good. All right. For Jon and Matt. It's actually for Matt. This is Jon, ending our first segment on Sam Cooke. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're listening. Segment 2 features Jon and Josh covering the album Wild Honey from the Beach Boys, which was released on December 18, 1967. The 23-minute and 58-second album was heavily influenced by the artist from both Motown and Stax Records, and is credited as one of the earliest examples of DIY pop. And you are getting a special treat, and you know why? Because it is the first time that the Jon-Josh duo has ever been together as a twosome. Josh, how excited are you to be spending time with me?
It's the Rock and Roll Express, baby. I'm ready to roll.
It is pretty awesome. I think we're going to double drop kick our way right through this album.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So we've 4 separate times, Matt and I have done it as a twosome, but the combos that have not been tag team partners are Josh and I, and then Matt and Josh. So I am so much of a music enthusiast, I can't imagine not being on a CTS bonus episode, Josh, but I'm sure one day it will happen.
Definitely.
Gotcha.
Sure.
So originally we were going to have a guest voice who will show up at some point down the road, but I'm pretty excited about the two of us doing it, and we drew a pretty interesting album tonight. We drew Wild Honey by the Beach Boys from 1967, and it is a true cold listen hot take. And as a reminder, we do not do research for this. As a matter of fact, in the intro afterwards, I'll give some context, but we are only going to be able to go with our prior knowledge and just what we've learned through the podcast and over our time listening to this artist and other artists. So, 15-minute time limit for reaction. Josh, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, and we have started the clock. So, initial thoughts on the 1967 album Wild Honey by the Beach Boys.
This sounds unlike anything the Beach Boys have ever done before. I have not heard anything. I have never heard this album before. I have not heard a single song on this album before.
There are no singles. Yep.
Yes, I was totally caught off guard. I didn't know what was going on. It was like the Beach Boys were totally throwing away everything that they were previously, and and trying to be something else. It was a real wild ride.
So I agree, because to me this sounds like the Beach Boys doing like Blue-Eyed Soul, which I'm pretty familiar with the Beach Boys, but I have to admit, Josh, I'm not super familiar with this album, and I know that this album would have checked in, if it's 1967, it would have checked in a year after Pet Sounds was made. So it would have been in that same time period that Brian Wilson was trying to make that Smile album. That's a fascinating period. So I do know, just in terms of the years, not from research, that's where it's at. But boy, does this sound nothing like any of those two albums.
Yeah, it's like Brian Wilson, assuming he's the main producer, was like, we're throwing all of that to the side. We're embracing what the late 60s are like. We need to capture some of these sounds and feelings that I'm having living in this era, because it sounds a lot like maybe I hear bits and pieces of what other bands that we've listened to on the show, right? Gone are the strong harmonizing. It's like a single singer on a lot of the songs, which was surprising. And
there's no like Beach Boys harmonization at all, almost.
Yeah, very little. Like maybe one or two songs I heard it, but yeah, it's like one sole singer up front, and in the background the production even sounds different to me. It's like they are trying to sound like more garagey or something. It didn't sound as crisp.
Like stripped down sort of I guarantee you they're going to call this lo-fi, because I'm very and it's like it's funny because you think of the Beach Boys just a year earlier, like Pet Sounds being this, super, produced thing. And this is, I listened to this in headphones, Josh, and it's clear this is a mono recording. It's like straight ahead. So I'd be fascinated to know if Brian Wilson even recorded this, or if he just consciously went in a different direction, because it's very straight ahead.
Yeah, I was hearing like fuzz and like other stuff, and I thought, is something wrong with my headphones, because I couldn't even understand what was going on. It was crazy.
There's a lot of piano. There's a lot of piano in this album, and
also
organ,
like that keyboard, or something like that.
Organ, and also I mean, there's a lot of bass in this album, and it's like it's a deep bass too, like almost like the electric bass that you hear in jazz, kind of. Or funk, right? And that's, I think, right off the bat, we haven't even talked about a song yet, but I think it's impossible to listen to this like I think you and I both did. I think we were both just totally caught off guard, because you think Beach Boys, like, either lush harmonizations, or depending on the other period, like production with, layered cascading lyrics. None of that's here. No, it's the opposite.
It's really stripped down. There's no like surfing vibe to it. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. It's like they're really trying something different on this album.
There's no like Brian Wilson falsetto. There's no like Mike Love, like the standard, baritone. I think it's like,
I don't even know who's singing.
I think it's the other guys. Well, it sounds like Carl Wilson a lot, because Carl Wilson's famous for God Only Knows, and that's the voice that I hear them. Once again, I didn't do the research, so I don't know. And then there's voices that I can't really place, so I wonder if it's Dennis Wilson or Al Jardine, because. Maybe. Yeah, because it's definitely not Brian Wilson unless he's singing totally different, and it's definitely not Mike Love, because those are the two voices you could pick out there. And I can pick out Carl Wilson because he does sing a lot, but so that's the first take. Any other general impressions before we get into some of these songs?
It seems like they are trying to be more adult on this album, in terms of, I'm thinking of the song I'd Love to Just Wants to See You, and then it ends up being To See You in the Nude. And, and the Stevie Wonder cover, which I believe is the third track, that really threw me for one too.
There's two covers I recognize, that one, and then the song Darlin', I have no idea who it's by, but that's also a cover, because I recognize that as a single. I don't know who did it, but I recognize that as a cover. But yeah, the Stevie Wonder was like, whoa, how about that?
Yeah, I heard it almost sounded like the Kinks, I guess, would be an equivalent. I heard some listens on that on this feeling I got from this album.
Yes, and not like You Really Got Me kinks. We're talking
No.
like concept album kinks. Yeah.
Right. And I also heard some Elton John type of
okay.
feeling too on Here Comes the Night. That struck me as something with, I don't know, with the way that they're harmonizing on that or just like the piano, I think maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
So there were like 2 or 3 tracks that I wrote down immediately. Like these were just, I enjoyed them, but I was totally caught off. The first was the Wild Honey right off the bat.
Yes.
Because it's all over the place. And I'm pretty sure Mike Love is singing on that one because I did recognize the voice. So I didn't get that jarring, but it's by himself.
Yeah. And he's not going really high like you would expect him to.
Well, yeah, and he sings that sort of higher baritone, but yeah, there's none of. It's so funny to hear all the songs sung by an individual, and Wild Honey's it's very simple in its production behind it, but it's also, there's a lot of stuff going on in the bass line. It's just all over the place. It's like a running bass line at one point, and then it's like almost like a plucked bass line. I also, another fascinating song to me, Josh, was Country Air.
Yes, that struck me as well too.
It was like something like Tame Impala would do. You know, it seemed like it was dubbed back. There was a rooster sound effect, but not in like a bad way. You know, it just kind of showed up and not like cheesy. I don't know how to describe it. It just kind of came, but it made sense, and that was the track where I said, this is like straight up lo-fi. It's like, it's fuzzy, it's distorted. And then at the end, that combination, song 10 and 11, How She Boogalooed It and Mama Says, are like playful, which the Beach Boys are in their surf music, but in a totally different type of play. Like not like we're at the beach having fun, you know, all American, more in like somebody singing a song outside of their comfort zone, but having fun with it and being pretty good at it too. So
yeah, maybe like this is almost like drugs was introduced to the Beach Boys or something. And
I think they were introduced before this. yeah, they were introduced before this. Yeah,
yeah. I don't know. It just strikes me as more of a like almost like an LA like almost Manson era vibe versus like an earlier 60s vibe.
Well, and
really
obviously
that culture, right?
Yeah, and the Beach Boys were wrapped up. So it's, another thing I was thinking of when I listened to this, Josh, we covered Beach Boys Today.
Yes.
In 1965. And that, it was a transition album because it wasn't like early Beach Boys truly, but it's still, half of it was like surf Beach Boys and half of it was what they would become with Pet Sounds. Right. So they do that in 65. Then Pet Sounds is 66. I know that for a fact. And that's its own thing that sounds nothing like this. Nor does Beach Boys Today sound anything like this. Right. And then there's this, which is this stripped down album. And what I'm fascinated, and I'm familiar with Smile too, when it was re-released by Brian Wilson, like what it was supposed to sound like. I know that the version
was in like the 2000s, right?
Right. They put out an album called Smiley Smile, which was kind of like supposed to be only about a third of what Brian Wilson's vision was, right? Mm-hmm. And then Smile came out. And that sounds nothing like this. So it's a really interesting time to listen to the Beach Boys because they're churning out albums that sound nothing alike. And to go from Pet Sounds to this, I can't stress enough, and Josh and I have said it multiple times, there's nothing similar to Pet Sounds in this. And this just sounds like a homage to R&B music. But done like by like a clearly white artist, but not in a bad way. But they're not trying to do what the British bands did, right? And that's, I think, what's weird. It's like the Beatles and the Stones sort of did this 5 years earlier, and now here's like the Beach Boys doing it, but like in 1967, after those other groups had moved on from it, Yeah,
it's like it's almost like they're late to the party, or they're just like finally getting around to all these other things they've been listening to, and they're like, okay, let's try something that
right.
I've liked that doesn't
or are
sound
they
like
just
what we've done
going?
before.
Or are they just going stripped down? Like, you know how we talk often about like how Bob Dylan always zigged when everybody else was zagging. Like, was that kind of the idea? I don't know. You know, all I could think of when I heard this is I want to hear this album a second time because
I thought that too.
I wasn't ready for it, and it's only 24 minutes, so it's like it'll be an easy listen. And the second thing I want to know is I want to know a lot of context on this album, and I look forward to reading about it on my own.
This would have been a fascinating album to research because, you know, for a main show, because it's so outside what we know about the Beach Boys. I feel like we just keep saying that, but it's like hard to until you listen to the album. It's like hard to even impress that.
I think it's going to be really interesting when we get to Pet Sounds on the regular show as well, because now we'll have another piece of context that we wouldn't have had before.
Yeah, we know it comes after, and we know it's going to be for that.
We're going to have to make sure Matt listens to this too, so that he has that context too along the way. Now, we only have about 4 minutes left. We've talked a lot about it, and we really haven't weighed in on our opinion. What do you think of this album?
Oh, I'm kind of mixed after the one listen. Like we said, just because I was so caught off guard, there's nothing super catchy about it, but it's not, on the other hand, it's not off-putting either, if that makes sense.
It's very agreeable. Yep.
Like you said, there's no singles on it. There's nothing on here that's like the hit single, or that's something that I'm going to come back to. But I do think there's something here. I just don't know what it is yet, if that makes sense.
I totally agree, Josh. It's the first time we've done one of these cold listen hot takes where I wasn't able to sort of synthesize what I felt like was a clear answer to an album. And I'm sure that will happen again, and that's the limitations but also the fun of the format. But I think that the biggest takeaway for me is the fact that it's almost like a Beach Boys solo album, in that they're singing individually, and the instrumentation, just the huge influence of that electric bass, the lo-fi production, and then, like Josh mentioned, the organ and piano. And there's both, because there's like a clear, like, traditional piano and a clear, you know, organ, which is playing a more intense sound. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's a good
and sometimes in the same song. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. It's like they were like, okay, we're going to rearrange the Beach Boys to put a person out front as the front man, and the rest of us are going to be like traditional instruments almost, instead of where they're all harmonizing or all, you know, part of the being up front in a way.
Yeah. And there's guitar here, but there's none of that surf guitar sound at all.
Not at all.
Which is, and it doesn't, and I don't know, like, if they were playing on it doesn't sound like that wall of sound that Brian Wilson was influenced by, or like the Wrecking Crew, you know, like, who I know was playing on a lot of their albums. So it sounds a lot. I don't even know, you know, I'd be fascinated to see who even played on this album, because it's not complicated, and not in a bad way. Yeah.
Right. It could almost be like, I could imagine Brian Wilson being like, okay, we're going to record all these parts separately, and then I'm just going to fix it all in like post-production or something, or like do it all on my own as some weird like experiment. You know, as opposed to just recording as a group together in a session or something to that, like that.
Right. Well, and we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to leave with this. I would say there's no bad tracks on this album. The standout tracks for me are Wild Honey, Country Air, I'd Love Just Once to See You, and then the final two, How She Boogalooed It and Mama Says. Any standout tracks for you, Josh?
I liked Country Air a lot. I liked Darlin' a lot, and Mama Says also.
Okay, so there's one other one that you liked. Did you think there were any non-standout tracks, like bad tracks?
Ooh, hard to say. I can't say that yet, because just the one listen was hard to rule something out.
I gotcha. Well, that's pretty much going to bring us to a close. So it sounds like we say slight recommend and definite recommend for a second listen.
Yeah. Where was this on the Rolling Stone 500? Is that where it's come from?
It is in the Rolling Stone 500. I believe that it was in the early 400s.
Okay.
Is where it fell in. Yes. It was never in any of the Rolling Stone top 500s before, and rarely has appeared in top 500 albums. So it's definitely like a revisionist. Seems like it's a revisionist look. And once again, I'll be curious to see a little bit of the history of this album. And I can certainly tell you that I'll have done my homework before we get to the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, which is going to be the next next and last Beach Boys album we will cover. Although we will cover the Brian Wilson Smile album, because that also shows up in the top 500.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess my final thought is, it's like hearing one of your favorite bands and then finding out they did something that you had never heard of before.
Right.
It's just so out there.
It's very much in line with like what's so fun about doing this podcast, that you can, you get a Beach Boys album a couple seconds before we're about to record. I think both you and I go into it, go, oh, Beach Boys, okay, this will be an easy one. And then you get an album and it's definitely not bad. But you immediately have to lock into something that you weren't expecting, and that's a cool thing, especially when you only have 24 minutes to do it.
Right? Yeah. You have to. The cool thing about the bonus segments is that you have to be ready to go. You have to lock in, and you have to like think about the album as you're listening to it.
And you can't have preconceived notions, because if you do, they're going to be ripped up a lot of times. So.
Indeed.